It's full screen, am I? Here we go. See, it's happening every day. Okay. I'm gonna have to stop. This is the risky thing now. I have to stop sharing.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Look at
Sorry about this. I thought it was all nice and ready to go, and then obviously didn't want to.
That's it. That's it. It's all come up in full screen there. That's good.
Brilliant.
Right. Yeah. So good morning, everybody. I think I probably know everybody's on the call at the moment, but just in case you don't know me, I'm Simon Needle. I am now the Park Services Manager, so working in the park section again after a few years away. I worked for parks for probably about 27, 28 years originally. Moved into planning and development, so I work alongside Joanne, who's on the call, amongst others, and then I've been moved back into parks again, so we're back home in some respects. So yeah, so we're going to go through this and talk about the broader aspects of green space in the city, and talk about things that what we can see out there, the different sites, the variety of wildlife that's out there, and some things that I've found, I suppose, over the years that I find interesting, exciting about those sites. So yeah, so like we said there, we're going to have a look at some of the parks and gardens, scenic spots. So they're not all necessarily going to be formal sites or nature sites, natural sites. There'll be a mix of the two. And so yeah, we'll go through that sort of local flora and fauna and discover how we can get involved in these spaces. So when we think about Birmingham, what comes to mind? Some people think of that very grey urban environment, the city centre. So we've got, the rotunda, the Bullring, Selfridges, that kind of thing. But we've also got the Canal Network as well. So we've got that running through the heart of the city, but also extending out through, connecting us to the countryside outside, to other local authority areas. So through into Dudley and Sandwell and Walsall, through to Solihull. We've got other historic sites as well that were previously sort of out in the countryside when Birmingham was still quite a small area. So we've got places like Sarehole Mill that are a remnant of that land, that sort of past agricultural use, but are now very much within the heart of the city. And then we've got places like Sutton Park, which is our largest of our park spaces. It sits at the north of the city. It's 2,500 acres in size, and where are we? 2025. In 3 years' time, it'll be celebrating its quincentennial as a I suppose almost as a public park space. So 500 years ago, it was sort of handed to the people of Sutton at the time as a park space coming from the royal estate as it was. So yeah, so it's going to be definitely our oldest park if we want to class it like that. Next slide. So when we think about the city, it is one of the greenest cities in Europe, and I know we can always debate over this about what makes a city green. How is it described as how can it be one of the greenest cities in Europe? There might be other cities that have, say, maybe some more parks than we do, or they have slightly more green space than we do. But of course, it all depends on what you look at in terms of that geographic boundary. So people often compare us to places like London or Paris. And if you go with Paris City, that's one thing. But if you go with Paris Region, that's a different thing. So, but yeah, we are still one of the greenest cities in Europe. I think that's probably easier to say that, with over 600 publicly accessible parks and green spaces across the city. And we've always said these spaces cover anything from, cover 4,700 hectares, so 47 square kilometres in area. If we added that all together, conglomerated that, so if we were thinking comparing that with something locally, that's 3 times the size of the city of Lichfield and 1.5 times the city of Worcester. So with quite a lot of green space, really, considering when you sort of conglomerate it all together, it forms that network of spaces across the whole city. We have different designations as well. So we have local nature reserves. We've got places like Balham's Wood. We've got Plantsbrook Local Nature Reserve. Woodgate Valleys Country Park is a local nature reserve as well. And Moseley Bog, which although it's BCC land, it's been managed for many years now by the Wildlife Trust, and is well known as having that association with Tolkien. We've got National Nature Reserve as well. So Sutton Park is a National Nature Reserve. That's its recognition for its habitats and species that are there. It's also a triple SI, and it's also quite a lot of it is a scheduled ancient monument as well, and that sort of relates back to that historical and heritage side of things. So thinking about the original bank and ditch from the deer park that was there, some of the other aspects that have gone on in terms of its use by man. So thinking about things like saw pits and charcoal pits that are there, but also the use by things like the militia, so the precursor to today's armed forces that used to go there and practice their rifle and target shooting. So if you go on the Longmoor Valley, that was the rifle range at one point. We also have other triple SIs in the city as well, but not in BCC ownership. So Edgbaston Pool, which is on the edge of Edgbaston Golf Course, that's also a triple SI, known for its plant and habitat species. And then locally designated, we've got sites of importance to nature conservation and sites of local importance to nature conservation. So these are identified again for their habitats and species, but are, rather than being recognised as being nationally important, which is what the National Nature Reserve and the triple SIs are, these are important to us at a regional level. So thinking about the West Midlands area or West Midlands County, or at a city level. So the sites of importance to nature conservation are looking at that sort of regional level, so they're comparable across the other local authorities that we have, and the sites of local importance are those that have importance at that city level. So they might not have particularly rare habitats nationally, but in a city context they are. 15 of our city's parks, commons and country parks, have previously held the Green Flag Award. That was a national quality award for parks and green spaces that was independently assessed and verified. So that makes them amongst some of the best in the country. So the Green Flag Award is, like I say, it's a bit like the Blue Flag for beaches. It's independently assessed and verified and looks at the quality and standard of things that are being provided. Unfortunately, it's one of these things that there is a cost to taking part in that. So this year we haven't taken part in that, but that's not to say that those spaces don't still meet those standards. It just means that we haven't gone through that independent verification. But some of our parks managers are Green Flag Award judges, so we know that where they're still looking at those, that we should still be meeting those standards on there. If we think about the urban canopy cover, of course, that's all part of the green infrastructure of the city. There are over 1 million trees across the city, so about 1.1 million trees or thereabouts. So probably enough for every man, woman, and child in the city, and that again makes us amongst the greenest cities in the UK if we're looking just at canopy cover. The average canopy cover across the UK is around 13%, and we're sitting at somewhere around 20% if we take out the areas that we can't plant up, like sort of lakes and rivers. So doing pretty well, but that's not equitably distributed, as you've probably heard from various other presentations that we've done. Thinking about that distribution, there's lots of trees in some parts of the city and not many in the others. So that's something obviously we're working on as part of our work towards delivering our urban forest master plan, and all of that work is recognised by our accreditation as a tree city of the world, which we've held for 5 years now. So that's an independently verified status that looks at how we manage trees, what investment we put in there, how we communicate, how we celebrate trees. So it's a good thing for us to have, and luckily that one's free to enter as well. So we'll be going forward again with that for this year. And then if we think about the other parts of that sort of green infrastructure, when we talk about green infrastructure, we often include blue infrastructure in that as well. Sometimes people talk about green and blue infrastructure. Sometimes we just talk about green infrastructure, but that does include things like the lakes, the reservoirs, the rivers and brooks that we have. So we've got 11 raised reservoirs in the city. So these are bigger bodies of water, usually held back by some kind of earth bund or dam. So if we think about places like Swansea's Park, Trinity Park, the big lakes that are at Sutton Park, Lifford Reservoir, all of those tend to be, or a lot of those tend to be artificially created bodies of water. And then we've got lots of smaller bodies as well. So if we go to Plantsbrook Nature Reserve, there are a number of smaller water bodies there, but those were a result of extraction of sands and gravels. And there are wet areas as well, Myers. But in terms of the sort of the rivers and streams, we've got, and I can't forget canals. So there are 32 miles of canals across the city. We've got 3 rivers that flow through the city. 2 of those are not very big at all. So we've got the River Ray and the River Cole, but they do run quite extensively through from the south of the city, and they all join up with the River Tame. So the Tame is running through sort of west to east across the middle of the city. And so there are 3 main rivers. And if we take those along with all the other brook courses that we have, there's about 250 miles of that, of rivers, brooks and streams across the city. So although we don't have a major river and we don't necessarily see major flooding events like you would see where the Severn has burst its banks, we do suffer with an awful lot of flooding. It's a lot of surface water flooding, and it's partly because we have a lot of these urban brooks within our bounds. So there's lots of water coming down through sites, lots of water flowing off into those, and that can cause issues. But that is all part and parcel of our sort of our green environment. Next one, please. So just there, so thinking about some of our green space, we just mentioned some of those who are going through, but yeah, so the National Nature Reserve is Sutton Park. We've got the country parks in the city. So we've got Lickey Hills Country Park, which is, so I suppose it's just on the fringe of the city, but it's a Birmingham run park. So that's in the south. We've got Newhall Valley Country Park in the north, Sheldon Country Park, which is sort of over to the east of the city, Woodgate Valley Country Park, and then Kingfisher and Country Park and Shire Country Park. They're pretty much, almost to me, they almost act as one because they are both along the Cole Valley. So the Shire is the southerlymost one, coming in following the Cole as it comes in from Solihull down to the bottom sort of Hall Green, heading north through towards Tyseley. And that's where Kingfisher Country Park takes over, and that runs through then up to the bounds of Solihull, where they've got Babs Mill, and they're part of the Cole Valley there. So you've got a very long linear route of, I think it's probably something like 12 to 14 miles. I think it's probably, if you follow the whole thing along, where you can walk almost off road or cycle off road pretty much the entire way through that country park area. The local nature reserves, we've already mentioned, we've mentioned some of those, but Edgbaston Reservoir is another one that we didn't mention there. It's another really big body of water. It's been really, it's been designated really for its wintering waterfowl. So that could be through gulls, that could be through ducks and divers that we get occurring there. It's a good place for them coming through on migration as they're passing through between wintering grounds and summer breeding grounds as well. And the spaces that we've got, we mentioned we've got 600 parks and gardens, and they vary in size. So yeah, we've already mentioned that Sutton Park is our largest space. But if we think about the things that are outside of the country parks, then the largest sort of urban park we have is Perry Hall playing fields, which is quite a large space. But as the name suggests, there it's very well used for recreation. It's used for football. It's particularly well used for cricket. But it does have lots of natural areas around the edge while it has the River Tame flowing through the middle as well. So you've got that combination of wetland habitats, grassland habitats, some woodland, as well as the amenity recreation area. So it's quite a big space right in the heart. And then the smallest park we have, and I suppose we can call it an urban park, is the Pines Public Open Space, which is only 485 square meters. Most of that is a play area, but it does have a little bit of natural space around it, and it's actually within a bit of a housing estate that's joined on to a much larger area of green space, so onto Rubery Quarry, and we've got a nice row of pines that run up from the main road up to the site into that location there. So it's well connected with other natural infrastructure. So although it's a small space, it's part of that bigger network. And then Premier Park, so most people will be aware of places like Cannon Hill Park, and that's, you know, a really well used and well known park that people come from, you know, regionally to come into that park, mainly because of the attractions that there, including the Midland Arts Centre and the sort of the events that they have on there. But it used to be a site for many major events. And then we've got places like Handsworth Park and Kingsheath Park. Now these parks are also a legacy of previous philanthropic giving. So Cannon Hill Park was donated to the people of Birmingham by Louise Ann Ryland. She also funded the laying out of the park space as well, because it wasn't set out as it is today when she first handed it over. So she funded all of that as part of a space for the people to use. And so Handsworth Park and Kingsheath Park as well. If you've been up to Kingsheath Park, you'll know the house that's there. That's a former residence that was built, and then the park space handed over. And we've got that with several other sites as well. Something about Highbury Park. So yeah, we mentioned there 39 of our parks have pools as well. So we've got those wetlands that are in there. 221 have play areas within them. So we've got quite a lot of play areas. I think there are 378 play areas across the city, but I say 220 of those are in parks. And we also have 68 green areas that are part of the leisure portfolio, but aren't classified as parks or public open space, but they are green open spaces that are part of a network of green infrastructure. And of course, we can't forget the fact that we've got things like golf courses, allotments and cemeteries, because in terms of wildlife, they don't see any difference. They don't know whether it's a park or it's a garden or whether it's a golf course allotment. What they're seeing is the collection of plants and other habitats that are there, and they're making those their homes. So you've got, within golf courses, you've got areas of longer grass, you've got trees, you've got short mown grass, you've got the bunkers, with some, sometimes with quite steep sandy faces, which might be quite good for some things like solitary bees. So lots of different opportunities in there. And then, yeah, within the bulk of the urban area, we also have housing, green spaces, education, playing fields, highways, verges and roundabouts. This all contributes to that network of green spaces. And then finally, I suppose, and perhaps something that we're seeing more of more recently, are things like rooftop gardens on buildings as well. And that's coming through as part of the planning process. So bringing in biodiverse roofs on rooftops to mitigate for the impacts of maybe the loss of some of that sort of brownfield sites that we see where buildings have been left or sites have been left vacant, and you've got vegetation coming through, things like buddleias and other grasses and short-lived wildflowers. So we're recreating those on the rooftops because they're invaluable for sort of pollinated species and some urban birds as well. Next slide, please. So yeah, just have a quick look at these pictures of some of these spaces. So yeah, the top one there, that is the edge of Longmoor Pool. So that's up in Sutton. So again, a very naturalistic space with quite big extensive areas of heathland, woodland, wetland, some very special species up there, which we'll probably mention later. We've got Licky Hills down in the bottom left-hand corner. Some of you may recognise that little bit. Lots of local people call it the castle, but it's the area where the toposcope is on. So that gives a visual map of what you can see from the top of the hill. So from the top of there on a clear day, when we had the old counties, you used to be able to see 13 counties from the top of there. So you'd be looking into Brecon and Radnorshire, but you can see the place like Black Mountains. You can see Sugarloaf Mountain in Wales. You can see through to Staffordshire, Shropshire. You can see out into Leicestershire as well, and across Worcestershire, and towards Herefordshire as well, and Gloucester. So lots of places. It's not quite a mountain, unfortunately. I think it's 970 feet. I think it's something like that to the top of the hill there. So we're about 30 feet off it being a mountain, but it's still very, very good views from the top of there. And then the next one across was that Newhall Valley?
Yeah.
Do we say? So yeah, Newhall Valley there. It's the walkway down through there. So again, remnants of open farmland, but there's also a mill still there, which is open to the public on certain days and in operation. So again, relating back to that past agricultural use. And the final one is part of the Jersey herd that's at Sheldon. So Old Rectory Farm at Sheldon Country Park. That's the only farm space that the city owns and runs as a sort of a demonstration farm. There are other urban farms in the city, but they're managed by other organisations. But the Jersey cows that we've got there have come from quite, I suppose, a well-known bloodline. These were actually the original bloodline from these, and these have all been bred down through over the years. Came from the Queen Mother's own herd when she still had a herd of Jersey cows. So they're a very, very important bloodline, and they're well known in the circle. But that farm space there gives people an opportunity to get, I suppose, quite close and connected to, I suppose, the farm animals, the domestic animals that we would normally have seen in locations like that. The buildings that are there are all listed buildings, or the farm buildings, the farmyard and rectory house. Yeah, a listed building. So it's quite an important site, and one that is very well known and very well used by the local community there. Next slide. Then we've got, so this is going to Perry Hall playing fields. So again, although the site today, you probably don't, if you go in there, going through the main entrance, you'll see this feature of this sort of square body of water with some landscaped areas around it and the bridges going over the water there, while the rest of the site is fairly open and well manicured for sports provision. This bit here, unless you stop and read the boards, or you know a little bit of the history, was the site of an old sort of manor house. It was Perry Hall, was on that site. There were lots of buildings like this many decades ago. My understanding is that Perry Hall was knocked down, and they used some of the brickwork, some of the bricks, to renovate Aston Hall. I think it's one of these things that we had a number of properties all in a similar state, Aston Hall being one of them, Perry Hall being another. Can't maintain them all. I mean, we're going back a long time now. This is not like in the years that I've been with Parks. It's well before that. But yeah, so we can manage one. So Aston Hall was clearly the one that was chosen to be to renovated and maintained. So it's a shame to see that some of the sort of historical context that we've lost, the buildings that were there, but it has allowed these spaces to come into public usage. And we've got a variety of waterfowl that use that bit of moat there, the swan's nest on there, and then the River Tame is just off to the right of that picture, and you get various bird species coming down because that links straight through. You can walk right through into the Sandwell Valley from there and into the RSPB Reserve, which is again well known for its wintering bird population. So you get things like goosander on the lake, on the river coming through. So some quite unusual birds that you perhaps wouldn't expect to see in a city centre location or city location. Next slide. Yeah, and here we go. This is the pines. So looking from underneath the pines that run up, this was a area of agricultural land long time ago. It was given over to the health authority. This is actually the site of what was the Rubery Hill Hospital, which was a mental health hospital that was there for many years. That facility closed down, and then the land got redeveloped for housing at the back of the Rubery Hill, which is the bit with the taller trees on at the back in the background there. But this green space has been retained, and this avenue of pines were part of the original run in through to that hospital site. The hill behind is a very interesting site, in as much as it was an old quarry, and it was used to extract quite hard quartzite stone for some of the local road making. So it's used as the sub base on some of the local roads, and for many years, right the way up until I think it was probably certainly the late 60s, it was still being quarried. Late 60s, early 70s, it was still being quarried for stone. And so the habitats that have formed on the front, on the scarp slope, that's been blasted away. We've got some nice heathland habitats that are on there. So lots of heather growing on there, which is quite nice because it's a continuation of the heathland habitats we see at Lickies. Next slide, please. Cannon Hill now, this is one of the sites that I worked at for quite a number of years. Although I started off in the range service working on a country park, I started out at Woodgate. I did move and work at this as a very urban park, and it was an interesting contrast to see when you've got these very urban sites that were laid out very formally. We've got the bridge over the pools that are here, and this is a listed structure. But that's part of the walkway around the park there. But you've got loads of different parts that make up Cannon Hill Park. So we've got these boating lakes with the bridge over. We've got a model of the Elam Valley, which was there to represent where Birmingham gets its water from. So I don't know if any of you have seen that, but it's tucked up in a little corner between the end of these pools and a couple of Cascade of Rockley pools. As you move around the site, you'll go past an old black and white timbered building called the Golden Lion. It's looking in a very sorry state at the moment, but hopefully the Friends group and others can help us raise the funds to bring that back into a sound state. I think the Friends group would really like to see that building being back opened, but that was moved to the park from Derrit End. It was just, I think, opposite the old Crown that's still in Derrit End now. So it's a building that dates back several hundreds of years. I think probably into the 1600s. It was built, and then behind that, we've got an area of mature trees. Now, that's referred to as the students' area, and that was laid out as a place for the quiet contemplation of plants by students of horticulture. Many of the plant species that are in there, the trees, were donated either as seeds or plants from Kew Gardens. So there's a good connection back to those very important collections there. And then if you move up, following up the River Ray, or heading upstream on the River Ray, you get through to some very more naturalistic habitats. You go the formal area of the park sort of goes through into a more natural woodland area. We've got the Queen Mother's Plantation, which is alongside the Ray there, which was originally laid out to celebrate the Queen Mother's 80th birthday. So just trying to think when that would have been. That probably would have been in the 80s, wouldn't it? I think it was. I can't remember how. I think she lived to be about 100, didn't she? So, and that developed over time. Had extra trees added to it. Had other wildflowers added to it, and bulb planting. So it's a lot more naturalistic than it once was. It was just open space. And as we move through, you get up into places like Holders Lane woods as well. So lots of different habitats, all sort of forming out along these linear routes. Next slide, please. Yeah, Handsworth Park again, another formal park. It depends what you like. Some people like the very formal layouts of parks with avenues of trees, shrub beds that have distinct flowering species in there, like rhododendrons, azaleas. They like the rose beds. So it's trying to make a mix of I think with cross parks we have to have a mix of everything. So there's something for all different tastes. But there's a nice collection of trees in Handsworth Park as well. These have been added to over the years, different species coming in. So not all native species, but things that have been brought in for their autumn colour, their spring colour, their flowering. But all of these still provide biodiversity value, or the majority of these, should I say, provide biodiversity value. So you've got where the geese have been grazing the grass around the lakes here. We get these sort of areas of daisy lawns because they're one of the things they're not grazing. So that has some pollinator value there. The trees, the horse chestnuts particularly are good for pollinators. They're really attractive to bees. We've got some of the roses will be as well. Not the double flowered types, but the single flowered species are good for biodiversity as well. And then there are some areas which are sort of becoming a bit more naturalistic around the edge. So perhaps reducing some of the areas of that formal mown grass. We don't need to be keeping that all as manicured as we once did. It's better to have those little fringes of longer grass around the edge. So again, a nice mosaic of habitats within that site. Kingsheath Park, was another one of our more formal parks. It's one of those strategic parks. Used to have many large events there, things like the Gardeners Weekend, but those were huge events. Took a lot of organising. But the park is still a site which is showing horticultural, horticultural interest. We've got the pool created at the front of Kingsheath Park House there, with things like Dawn redwoods around the outside, different planting around the lake that offers a habitat for coots and moorhens and other waterfowl. But we've also got groups who are working there who are carrying on the tradition of training in horticulture that was once prevalent there. We used to have this site as our horticultural training school. We're now working alongside partners such as Thrive, who do therapeutic horticulture, but they also do some horticulture training as well for their clients, and they've taken on the management of what were once the TV gardens that were laid out for as part of things like Gardeners World and Gardeners Time, which used to be broadcast from there. So those were two TV programs that went on for many years. Particularly Garden Time went on for many years with Cyril Fletcher, and then now Gardens World still continuing on, but at different sites over the years. Those garden spaces still open to the public at things like weekends, bank holidays, and different points throughout the day, throughout the week. So you can still go and see the gardens that were created over time as part of those different programs. Next slide. So right, yeah. So I've mentioned a few of these parks, but like, how do you find them? So you can go onto the BCC web pages. You can go into the Find a Park page. That will give you a list of lots of Birmingham's parks. It'll also give you a little map and an address to go to. But there's also a web channel as well on or YouTube channel, which has got around 100 videos of parks, so you can have a view of what some of these spaces look like, so you know what to expect before you get there. They're all laid out in alphabetical order. Then they're not covering all of the parks, see, but these were just a selection of parks across the city that we could go with. So going from places like Abbey Fields through, there are parts of places like Bilsey Common, so larger sites, Swansea Park, etc. That would be on there. So bigger sites, it's very hard to put the very big sites on there though, because just to give a flavour of those would be a very lengthy video. Most of these are probably somewhere in the region of sort of 30-40 seconds to a minute, just giving you a flavour of those sites. Next slide. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about, so I suppose the wildlife side of things. So despite its urban sprawl, it is home to a surprisingly diverse range of flora and fauna, and that's thanks to the parks, the canals and nature reserves, and the fact that many of these were either part of much larger areas. They were well connected. These are often the remnants of what was once there, in a wider sphere. So yeah, it's offering vital habitats for numerous species and provides opportunities for wildlife enthusiasts and those new to visiting the green spaces to get connected with nature. So natural environment demonstrates that resilience of flora and fauna, even in those urban settings. So parks and reserves offer residents and visitors a chance to appreciate the city's living treasures while highlighting the importance of the conservation efforts. I think the three pictures there are, I suppose, an example of things that perhaps people don't always realise might be around the city centre, and certainly at one point we didn't see these things, and they are a result of the changing environment, of the adaptation of species that are not native in one example, and also probably partially, I think, maybe climate change as well. So in the bottom pictures there on the left hand side, we've got peregrine falcon. It used to be a species that was mainly associated with mountain sides and sort of steep cliffs, because that's what their nesting space there. Been heavily persecuted over the years, but with the rise of things like high-rise buildings, so blocks of flats, things like the BT Tower particularly, and the sort of both the lesser persecution of these species, their numbers have increased and spread, and so we're seeing probably something like about 7 pairs of peregrines now nesting in and around the city centre, or around the city, using high-rise buildings, so places like BT Tower, Old Joe at the university, various clock towers, and that's reflective as well of other sort of cities and urban areas in that combined authority at the West Midlands area. So they're spreading quite well, and taking advantage of things like the urban pigeons as well. So the feral pigeons, that's a key source of food for them, but they will take other birds as well. So yeah, so there's clearly enough food for them here to survive out and raise chicks. The one in the middle there is a muntjac deer. Now that is a new species to the UK. It was brought into an animal collection some decades ago, and a number escaped, and they have slowly spread across the UK. They're very well adapted to living in small thickets of trees and woodlands. So some of our larger urban parks which have quiet spaces, these are ideal for these to lie up in, and then they use those green corridors to move around, following the rail lines, following the canals, the rivers and streams. So they don't need a lot of space, and loads of people have seen these right sort of into the heart of the city centre as well, within some of the churchyards and along the canal lines as well. Can be mistaken, I suppose, for a large dog. They're sort of a bit sort of Doberman-like, I suppose, if you see them from behind, and that sort of size. So not particularly big, but and can be quite elusive. But if you hear them calling at night, they've got quite a loud bark, particularly so when they're coming into the rutting season. So you may hear them rather than see them. You might also see signs in terms of the footprints that are left behind if you're going along the sort of muddy edge of a canal corridor or through a park. The one on the right hand side there is hummingbird hawk moth. So that's the species that is migratory, and we're seeing a lot more of those in summer. I remember, it would be very, very unusual to see those in the summer months at all, but they're becoming more common. And yeah, I suppose people don't always know what they are, because you don't expect to see something that's hovering with its long proboscis over flowers moving around. So people are often a bit sort of bewildered if they've not seen one before. Yeah, because it is quite small, but it's very reminiscent of hummingbirds. So okay, next slide. And if we think about the plants, so that obviously the plants are the things that make up all the habitats that we have in the city, and there's a huge range of plant species in the city, from very common things like clovers and daisies and dandelions that we see. But I mean, those are really, really important for pollinator species. They're providing often very early sources of nectar, particularly things like dandelions early in the year. You might see some of our grass verges, particularly on the central reservations of the highways verges, just absolutely plastered in dandelions. Very important resource there. But moving through to things like the more natural habitats. So when we're looking at our ancient woodland areas, so we've got places around Moseley Park and Sutton where we've got this remnant woodland flora, where we've got ramsons or wild garlic, we've got bluebells, wood anemones, and then things like dog's mercury and moscatel. There's a whole host of species that are associated with these very old woodland areas, often things that take a long time to spread and colonize. So they're an indicator that that habitat has been there for many, many decades or centuries in the case of woodlands. So for a woodland to be identified as being ancient or semi-natural, ancient woodland, should I say, it has to have been there since at least 1600. So, and these species are those that would be indicators of that being a very old woodland site. And then we can think about the tree species that we've got quite a variety of tree species across the city. We've got large areas of natural woodland. So we've got 1,398 hectares of woodland across the city, which is going to be predominantly things like oak woodland and birch woodland, but with alder and willow. So all of these have got pollen sources or have got food sources for different invertebrates. But then we've also got non-native trees as well. And I think while there's a drive to make sure we've got plenty of native species living and growing in the city, we also do need to think about the non-native species, because these are things that will allow us to maintain tree cover in the face of changing climate change, in the face of new pests and diseases that are coming through. And yeah, not all non-native trees would be good for our native wildlife, but there are quite a lot that still would be. There are, they fill that same niche, but in their own native range. So those trees with catkins will provide a pollen source. Those with single sort of typical flowers, again providing nectar sources as well. So a good mix, and of course the niches that they provide, they can for things to feed on the leaves, live on the bark, and around those trees. So lots of opportunity there for those. If you think about grasslands, we've got some really nice grassland sites as well. So places like Woodgate Valley Country Park, and areas of grassland around Sheldon, and Newhall Valley and the Hilltop as well, which is part of that bigger section of Sandwell Valley itself. These are areas where we're managing those as wildflower meadows. They have a range of different flowering species in there, and some of these are quite good as well for fungi species. So within some of the meadows at Woodgate, we have things like waxcap fungi, which are particularly associated with old older pasture land. So again, we're not just thinking about those showy plants. I mean, some of the waxcaps can be quite colourful themselves, and I know Lucas, who's on the call, is really really good with the fungi and identifying those, and has done a series of different walks, different sites across the West Midlands in terms of fungi. So yeah, we'd be able to give us a whole range of information about waxcaps, but some fantastic species there. And we're not just talking things like, you know, the buttercups or daisies, but we're going through to things like knapweeds, oxeye daisies, vetches, so members of the pea family. But then we're also seeing orchids within these sites as well. Some of these grassland sites we've also been able to expand as well. So taking green hay, so freshly cut hay that contains those flower species that have gone to seed but are not yet quite ripe, we can take that grass and then spread that on new sites. So think about Perry Hall playing fields or Farnborough fields over in Castle Vale, where we've taken this green hay, strewn that, so spread that across those sites, and then over the following years, that seed that has dropped has germinated, it started to grow, and so we've taken those flower species and those flowering communities to other sites. So within Perry Hall, there are some quite nice areas of green-winged and early purple orchids, for example. Same goes for Farnborough Fields. It could be common spotted orchids, or it could be marsh orchids, depending on the nature of the soils. And then like I said, we've got those urban plantings as well. So we've got those non-native trees, but also those areas of shrubs and herbaceous plants and annual plants that are being put out, all providing this matrix of habitats, of different flowering times, that extends the opportunity for the pollinator insects and other wildlife throughout the seasons. So if we were just relying on a few species, we might only get a flush at one point, but this is taking things right way through from winter. So we're seeing mahonias that are in flower over the winter, providing an opportunity for pollen resource for bees on warm days. You know, even a day like today, we've got the sun out, although we're in the winter, you might still see insects out. Then right the way through into the autumn and into the winter. Next slide. Right, yeah. So I suppose a little bit we've already covered here. So thinking about what's we've spoke about some of the birds, but we're also looking at the flora, but the other animals of Birmingham as well. So bird life, everything is within the city, really, from common species, so things like robins and blackbirds and magpies, that all are finding a niche to live within the city, feeding on different things. The robin is one of those birds that if you're out in the city centre, maybe, you know, late at night, early hours of the morning, you'll hear that singing away. These are actually very heavily influenced by the street lighting that we have. So they'll be sitting there, it's been replicating, I suppose, a bit of the dawn chorus, and they will carry on singing all the way through. And then through to the waterfowl like swans and mallards, they'll thrive on the city's canals and ponds, but we do get those other unusual species as well. So things like great northern diver, which you'd only expect to see normally, you know, out across off the coast of Scotland on some of those big lochs up there. You'll see that, you know, it's been seen at places like Bartley Reservoir and Edgbaston Reservoir, and kingfisher as well, which is along some of the canals and streams, and more recently things like dipper, which is a very well adapted aquatic or it's not aquatic, a very well adapted bird species that lives in that sort of aquatic region. It gets its name from dipping underneath the surface of the water to get water living invertebrates. So that's been seen along some of our brook courses around the Bourne Brook and the Ray as well. So, but those were normally things that you'd see in Wales, you know. So it's an interesting thing that obviously, you know, the water quality is improving. It's still not great, but it's providing an opportunity for these to move in. Mammals, you know, we've got everything from you know, the muntjac deer that we've mentioned already, but we have seen things like red deer in Sutton and in places like Whitton as well, because they've followed the rail line down from Brown Hills Common, so up in Walsall, the big heathland areas up there, and from Cannock Chase. Deer and foxes, the foxes and badgers are throughout the city. I mean, we often know about the urban foxes, but badgers are very, very opportunistic. There are so many sets scattered across the city, and I think people are surprised by that when they see those. And perhaps something that people see very little of, really, I suppose, are bats. Now, that's maybe because they're, they are nocturnal or sort of crepuscular in their nature, coming out just after sunset. But we have quite a few different species across the city. If you go somewhere like Lickies or Sutton, there are about 9 or 10 species of bats there out of, I think there's about 16 species in the UK, thereabouts. Um, and some of these are quite rare. So we have had things like horseshoe bat recorded within the Samwell Valley. Now that is quite unusual for the area. We've got our smallest UK bat, pipistrelles, which are pretty I suppose found pretty much across the whole of the city, but then brown long-eared bats as well, Daubenton's bats, which feed low over the water. So lots of different species, different niches, different habitats. And the bats obviously are feeding on invertebrates. So they're out at night feeding on mosquitoes, low-flying invertebrates over the water, or larger beetles that are flying out over the tops of tree canopies. Various wildflower initiatives have helped bolster bee populations as well, and butterfly populations. The management or the provision of these open water sites is great for dragonflies. They're all critical as part of the pollination process or ecosystems health, because they're all helping regulate parts of those. But I will say, some sites you're probably not necessarily thinking about bees, but if you go somewhere like Licky Hills, where you've got the slope of grass going away from the visitor centre, there's lots of bare patches of earth there, and you might not think those are great for bees, but those are essential for solitary bees. If you go through there in the spring, you'll see little piles of tiny little molehills almost of friable soil that have been created, and that's where we've got bees burrowing in to lay eggs, or we've got the emergent bees coming out from the eggs laid the previous year. So we don't just need to think about having pollinator plants for bees, but we also need to think about the habitats where they're sorts of laying their eggs. They're not always going to be in a hive like we think about for honeybees. We've got things that people don't think about as well. So how many people go to places like Sutton or come to Licky or one of the other sites like that and don't think about the fact that we will have reptiles there. Things like common lizards, grass snakes, slow worms. They can all be found on these sites. Some of our inner city sites, so Dorbury Fields, for example, in sort of Bramwood, that is well known for slow worms. So these are right on people's doorsteps. It's most people are going to be walking past these, not even thinking about it. And as much as it pains me to say it, where we do get things like some of the fly tipping, the dumping in urban sites, that has been particularly beneficial for things like slow worms. So pieces of carpet that are left behind, somebody's dumped a piece of carpet out, they actually create a sort of a refuge for some things like slow worms. They can get underneath that, and if it's particularly with like a dark side up facing the sun, that's absorbing the heat and that's passing the heat through to those slow worms underneath, so they're getting that warmth while still being protected from predators. So it's not always attractive, but actually they're taking benefit from things that we've left behind or dumped there. So we do have to be careful when we are thinking about going on to those sites and we're just going to clear all that rubbish away. We have to think about we need to be careful about what might be underneath those as well. And we mentioned some of the aquatic life, but again, we don't always think about the fish that are in those canals and rivers and lakes. So we've got roach and perch and rudd, as well as the amphibians like frogs and toads and newts. Perhaps one of my favourite finds in some of our small rivers are things they're called miller's thumb or bullheads. They're quite an old fish species that go back right the way to sort of like times of the mass glaciation. They were one of the first, one of our original fish species in those streams. They can still be found in some of our watercourses, particularly around the upper reaches where you've got these pebbly, shingly beds. And those can also be places where we find things like crayfish as well. So our native crayfish around Sutton and the fringes of the city. Some of these rivers have been and streams have been quite good for those. Although there are issues with non-native invasive species coming in, we have to be seeing how we can manage these spaces and improve those spaces, and try and create refugia as well, so we can continue these populations going forward. Next slide. Yeah, there's just a few examples here. I think of those things then. So we've got, if we're going around from the bottom right hand corners, we've got peacock butterfly, which is one that many people will see, one that often overwinters in garden sheds. So if you're going into a shed or into a log pile or some other place like that where there's enough shelter from the dampness, but it keeps it cool but dry, you will find these species overwintering. So they're one of the first species that we're seeing out in the spring as soon as it gets warm enough. We've got newt species there. We've got perch coming along the bottom row, and then heading upwards, Bohemian waxwing. So these are a really, really interesting species. Something that used to be very rarely seen, but this is one of the ones that have taken advantage of a lot of the urban plantings that we see. So on things like traffic roundabouts or supermarket landscaping, where people have used things like cotoneasters that have lots of red berries, or have been using rowan trees as part of their landscaping. So these species, when it's very cold or there's been a poor year in the northern latitudes, so Norway, Sweden, you get these eruption years where you get huge flocks coming down to the UK. And they can often, like I say, they can often be found in these very urban locations, because we're putting those tree and plant species in that do well in that harsh urban environment, but they're providing that massive food resource for them. So you'll often see them quite funny with a little tufty bit on the head there. And I don't know whether you can quite see, there's a white wing bar with like some little red drops after it. Those look like little red drops of wax that you get running down the outside of a candle. So that's part of their name there, the waxwing. And we've got obviously badger cub there, and the slow worm as well. One of the interesting things I think I've noticed over the years is, I'm just trying to think, I can't remember how long ago it was now, but it's probably going back, or might be 20 years now, I think, when we had a massive outbreak of foot and mouth across the whole of the UK. I was working at Licky Hills at the time, and because we had to limit access to agricultural space and public open space to stop the potential transfer of that disease by people moving around, we had to close off parts of the park. But we also had to go and check that closure was still in effect. And that's when we started to see, all sort of signs of the animals being there that you didn't normally see, because there were so few people walking through there. The paw prints and the slots left by the deer that were moving through that woodland, that were there all the time, but were normally trampled out by dog footprints, human footprints, etc., were all there. And it was just amazing to see how many paw prints there were, where all the trails were. It gave you a real insight into where these things were going that you didn't normally see. So it's interesting when you can get into the quieter parts of the park, or maybe we've got those sort of unfortunate things happen, that you see that actually the wildlife is there. It is coming out. Next slide, please. So right, okay, so learning about local flora and fauna. So making these green and blue spaces their home is a diverse range of plant and animal species that we've seen. So from vibrant wildflowers, fascinating bird life, so much to discover. I think we need to give a shout out to the likes of people like the West Midlands Fungi Group and Eco Record, that collects and collates and makes available information about the wildlife of Birmingham's fungi that's there. Think about the variety of plants and animals that are there. That's all adding to that picture. There's a huge army of local recorders out there who are picking up these different species, finding things that we've never seen before. And as we get more people who are interested in those things, we are finding more species, things that perhaps have never been recorded before in the Midlands. Maybe not because they've not been here, but just because nobody's been looking for them. But there are things that are coming here that are new to us, that are now making Birmingham their home, because it's now warmer over the winter, so they're able to stay here all year round, whereas they might have just been migratory before, or they've actually slowly moved up the country. So we are seeing this variety of different things. So Eco Record currently has a database of over 500,000 species records, and that contributes to things like our planning reviews as well. So think about the impact of planning. All of that is there. But you know, people like yourselves, green champions, these local recorders, those special interest groups, they're all adding to this picture, because there's no way that those of us who are working in the natural environment every day actually have the time or can get around and do all of this work. We are relying on you to be out there, and these groups are also, you know, welcoming to other people who want to get in and learn. You know, if you're looking on things like Facebook or those types of groups, that's often quite a good way to start to get in and see what's out there, see what's happening. And I do that. That keeps me a little bit sort of in tune with what's out there. I can see what people are seeing in our sites, sort of making me remember what things are. Because of course, if you don't see these things every day, or you don't see them very often, it can often make it hard to remember what they are. But seeing pictures being posted, getting that confirmation of identification, is all a way of sort of increasing your own learning. Next slide. So we've got quite a lot of there's been quite a lot of challenges over the years. So from 2016 2017, there was a parliamentary inquiry into the future of public parks that found that the value of parks and green spaces, although it was well documented, but it was not well understood, so not fully protected in policy. And I think to an extent we're still partially there, although there's lots more policies and legislation that have come through to help protect some things. Does it go far enough? Do we get a good balance? I think it's very hard when you've got so many demands on natural resources and space. But hopefully all of these things try and come together, and we can get enough people making the case for nature and for parks and green space. But yeah, as we say there, that inquiry found that it was a non-statutory service, and so therefore non-essential, and so has suffered disproportionately with budget reductions imposed, and particularly following the 2008 global financial crisis and subsequently austerity measures. So although Birmingham has over 600 green spaces, like I say, many of them inherited from the Victorian past, we need to see Birmingham as a 21st century green space or green area that looks forward, not backwards, particularly in how we address things like climate change and nature recovery and that inequity of access. So we're looking to change the way we view and manage the green space in the city and identify more good quality public open spaces, publicly accessible green spaces. So as we've engaged with communities across Birmingham, I think we all became very aware that sections of our community currently face barriers in accessing green space or making full use of the facilities on offer, and that's the work that we've been putting underway to understand where those gaps are. And Birmingham was the first city to develop that tool to highlight those inequalities or inequity of accessing green space, which we called that ambition sort of our to achieve that equitable. To achieve that equitable access to green spaces, our environmental justice plan. Next slide. Do we have any more slides? So yeah, so thinking about the benefits, so it's now possible to capture the value of our natural environment. So by thinking about combining the biological science of ecology with pragmatic disciplines of economics, we've got this joint venture known as that. So we're looking at what we call natural capital. So that's all of those benefits that the natural environment is providing through to people. So that could be air cooling, air cleansing, stormwater inception. We're putting a financial benefit or financial cost against what that would be to deliver it in a non-natural way. So if we had to create a piece of infrastructure or a piece of equipment, a machine to deliver that, what would that cost be? And that's really sort of brought a bit more visible that benefit of the natural environment. Is put it in terms that perhaps people now understand a bit better, thinking about what is the impact on there, and if we don't do that, what are the negative impacts of not providing that space or providing that natural environment. Think about the fact that climate change would have a significant effect on the operation of some businesses or manufacturing, because if the temperature gets too hot, things might not work, staff might be more under pressure with their health issues. So all of these things combine to create pressures. We know that spending time in the natural environment as a resident or a visitor improves our mental health and feelings of well-being. can reduce stress, fatigue, anxiety, all of those things. It helps boost the immune systems as well as encouraging physical activity, and it help, well, or may help reduce the risk of chronic diseases such as asthma as well. And being out in these green spaces as well, and maybe seeing like-minded people helps combat some of those aspects of loneliness that some people have, particularly in these days where many people might be working in an isolated manner. They don't necessarily have that day-to-day contact that they once have. It gives the opportunity to bind community together. But there's loads more to do. So the number of people who spend little or no time in natural spaces is too high. Recent data from the Monitoring Engagement with the Natural Environment Survey tells us that 12% of children not visit the natural environment each year. And in the most deprived areas of England, people tend to have the poorest health and significantly less green space than the wealthier areas. Playing and learning outside is a fundamental part of childhood and helps children grow up healthy. It helps build a whole range of different aspects of their learning, not just the sort of the physical side of things, that's motor skills, muscle memory, but also thinking about how people use their imagination as well within those spaces, thinking about how they create I suppose places within their mind as well as physically. Some children in the city are lucky enough to have a family garden, but others not. So if we think about those with living in blocks of flats or very dense urban areas, maybe it's a small yard. So it's really important that we can find other ways to give them better access to the great outdoors. And like we said, we know that regular contact with green spaces has a real beneficial impact on children's physical and mental health and well-being. Have we got another slide? We've got a few more. So just a few more slides to go. Yeah, so think about all that. There was the Lawton report came out many years ago now, which was looking at the natural environment. It was in the white paper, and that report spoke about having spaces that were bigger, better, and more joined up. So what spaces we already have, can we make those bigger? Can we put buffers around the edge to protect those from external impacts? Can we improve the quality of those habitats and areas within them? And then can we make those more joined up? Can we create connections between those? Because populations that are isolated or fragmented are at risk. We need to be making sure that there's an opportunity for species to move between sites, for the genetic makeup of plants to be spread between those communities as well, to make sure that they're resilient. So cross-pollination of plants is one of those ways that helps in that, and that's been, I suppose, encapsulated in the Nature Recovery Network, which is all part and parcel of the work that underpins things like biodiversity net gain now. So next slide. Oh, we're nearly there. So so just on that Nature Recovery Network, so yes, just come back to that, and underpinning biodiversity net gain, which is a process that was been set in place through statutory legislation. It sort of runs in parallel with the planning process. So this is now sort of mandating that developments have to deliver a net gain, so an increase on biodiversity over pre-development levels, and that where that is not delivered on site, that needs to be focused into these areas of higher priority. So that's the Nature Recovery Network. So that's a network of spaces and areas in which have been identified in a regional level. So for us, it's at the combined authority level. Think about where could that investment go, that actually where they can't deliver it on site, they're having to pay for the investment to deliver and manage long term that improvement in biodiversity. So this is potentially one source of new income for green space management that we need to be picking up on. Next slide then, please. So getting involved. So with your seasoned green space volunteer or looking to contribute for the first time, there's loads of opportunities for everyone to help design, care for, and enjoy our city's green and blue spaces. Whether that's be through a local friends group, through a special interest group, through just getting out and doing something in your local community, engaging with the Ranger Service, Wildlife Trust, any of those. Taking part in things like the Big Garden Birdwatch, which has just been, I think was that just finished now, I think. But there are other things as well. Looking out for other organisations' activities that they're saying. You might be doing something on your own, but you're part of something that other people are doing. Walk in the woods, for example, in May. Connecting with fellow nature enthusiasts. So share your passion for nature with others. to learn, exchange ideas, and collaborate on initiatives that make a positive impact on our environment as well. So you get I think certainly a lot of the things that I've learned over the years have come from working with and connecting with other enthusiasts, and that's something that transcends ages as well. I think, I mean, I went out at a very early age with my parents. I was lucky enough to go out with my parents into natural spaces, but there were other people of older generations there who were willing to share their experiences with me to help me find things, identify things. And I think that's something that I've hopefully continued to do with others as well, taking school groups out, leading walks and talks, all of those sorts of things, trying to pass on that sort of enthusiasm and knowledge. But you still can't beat doing things for yourself as well. For me, learning things like birdsong, it's like it was something you could listen to a record, you can listen to recordings, but I think for me, going out, listening, finding the bird that is making that sound is the thing that then cemented that in my mind. So now, if I just heard the song on its own, I might not have always remembered. So lots of things that can be done to help you sort of build that experience. Yeah, so there we go. So thank you. Yeah, so I think a bit of a chance there for me to stop talking, and for anybody else to sort of make any comments about their experience of green space and make connections. I see there's a few things in the chat there. So Helen, you said you went on a bird walk in Kingfisher Park yesterday. 36 species spotted. Like I said, gadwall and water rail. So really good species. Water rail particularly elusive. Interesting species to see along there.
Well, it wasn't me. I didn't actually see it, to be honest, but I heard it, and some of the other people around it knew enough to be able to identify it from its call.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, I mean, this is one of these things that skulks along, in sort of the vegetation along the edge of lakes and sort of the rivers. It's not really until you're sort of right on top of them that they will often sort of fly up, a bit like snipe, and woodcock that we get in the city. If you're walking through a rough grass area, you're about to put your foot on it, and then this thing suddenly erupts out the ground, so it seems, scares the living daylights out of you, and flies off. But gadwall's good as well, yeah. So gadwall's very similar to the female mallard when you see them. So could quite easily be overlooked unless you know what you're looking for. Yeah, good stuff.
To say that we are going to share. We can share the slides. We can share extra information, and we can share the recording as well. So we'll make sure you've got as many contacts as possible. And if we think of anything else that comes up from it, we'll I'll put it on a web page so that you can go back to it and it's in one place and you can find it afterwards.
Have you got an answer to Joanne's question?
I was just going to say that. I said, about priority nature projects for 2025, and if so, locations and their objectives. I think the thing is that there's loads and loads of spaces we could be doing stuff, and part of it will be about where we can find funding to match those. So we've got a huge range of projects in things like our East Birmingham Green Infrastructure Master Plan, all these locations where we could be doing something, but we don't have the money to do it all. So working with partners to identify that funding will be key. But we will be looking at some of those areas, some of the bigger corridor sites as well. So particularly looking at how we can bring those on for the delivery of off-site net gain as part of that development process. So places like Hilltop, Newhall Valley, Kingfisher, particularly because they're offering some good opportunities there. And then thinking about how we can introduce things like either pop-up parks or pocket parks where we might have some current sort of low value amenity grass. It could be an extensive highways verge at a junction, but actually with a little bit of investment, a little bit of thought, we can be making those a bit of a greener space. So we've started to get whereas when we think about if we think about that sort of that bigger, better, more joined up. One of the things that they said in the Lawton report was about having stepping stones to allow wildlife to move between the more higher quality sites. But we also need to do that for ourselves as well. So even though you might have a park space, but it might be a little bit away from your home, can we do something to help improve that journey, to make it a bit more naturalistic? Can we think about how we can improve the quality of those spaces, so that we could look at those sort of creating these little node spaces within the areas where we don't have that access, that direct access to those better quality green spaces. And last year, of course, we did the A to B roads program, which we'll be continuing this year, but thinking about how we can then start to enhance those verge spaces. So we took 100 kilometres of central reservation verge out of mowing last year. Some of those were starting to show plant species that haven't been recorded there for 60, 70 years. So thinking about the harebells on the central reservation up round by Swanshurst and Bilsey Common. Yeah, just because of the mowing, they've never been seen, but by removing that mowing, those species are still there, still coming out. So hopefully those will have set seed this year. Maybe we'll start to see increases in those populations locally. But where we haven't got that diversity, can we think about how we might start to add in something either through green hay strewing or through seeding, plug plant growing? One of the things I'd like to get people like Thrive more involved in is can we get them growing some wildflower plug plants, so we can sort of start to hand those out to groups to put into sites. So we've got growing local flora, which is what the Wildlife Trust do. A similar sort of thing to supplement that.
The other thing that we are doing is trying to paint a really good picture of all the nature related projects that are happening in the city, and it's something that Mark is doing, because everybody, it's the nature of where we are at the moment. You get on with what you're doing. We have a very good, exciting network with the Alliance where we hear each other's stories, and that's brilliant. But even further than that, there are all sorts of projects that are happening, and we want to get this really good overview. And Mark's got a brilliant list started of all these things that some are ongoing projects, some are sort of 5-year projects, some are a friends group just doing, I'll just say just doing something like a bee bank, or these kind of projects, and also the other aspect of it, which is the master planning, which we have for East Birmingham at the moment. So one of the next sessions that we're going to do will be around those projects and the kind of things that we've got. All these secret places in the city. We want to look at the kind of secret things that are going on in these secret places, because in a city as big and diverse as Birmingham, it's really hard. Nick Grayson, who got this project going in the first place, he had this sort of catchphrase, which was making the invisible visible. And it really is important in a city like Birmingham, because you can feel that nothing is happening when all sorts of fantastic things are going on. So that will be the topic of a future webcast that we'll be doing.
I think that will be really good, because I find that sometimes when you go out to places and you kind of see it, you tend to unavoidably your eyes drawn to all of the challenges that there are, and the things that make people feel down about the spaces that they're living in. And so having people around you that remind you that actually we are making progress is just really, really important. If I think about the people that I was on the walk at yesterday, so Jim, that's trying to restart the Friends of the River Cole, and it's very hard to kind of walk past, for example, the Rangers building, and for him not to have a bit of a yeah, well, that was a loss, but then we'd been on this amazing walk, so yeah, that would be great, Debbie.
Oh, sorry, couldn't unmute myself then. That's one of those famous things. Thank you for that. And it is really important. And one of the things we always say, and I know, Mark always says it, I always say it, but he always says it after the meeting. The council, we know all the no money, all these problems. The Alliance gives us hope. It's a bit like Star Wars, That's why we chose it. Don't tell anybody. That's why we called it that. Mark always feels so much better because he has to deal with all of the spreadsheets normally, and to hear all of those stories of everything that's going on, it does give you that hope and that inspiration to keep going. So it is one of the things that we are really determined to keep going. So we have the Alliance, as I say, which is organisations. We have the Green Champions, which are individuals. They may still be part of organisations. And we have an awful lot of passionate council officers. We were talking earlier about sort of Mary bumped into her, but Mary from Birmingham Open Spaces Forum bumped into her boss at the old boss at the Wassail in Perry Hall. You know, there is this network. Some people have referred to it as the mycelium in the woodland. You know, there's all these connections and nodes, and there's so much fantastic stuff going on. We have to keep it going, and we have to make it bigger, better, and more joined up. I think that expression really sums up what we are going to try and do. We are going to do going forward. Did you want to add anything, Mark?
No, just echo everything that you said, Debbie. There's a huge amount happening in Birmingham, and like Helen said, you can sometimes overlook the good because you just tend to hear about the bad things. But what we've captured so far, I'm sure, is just a small part of what's actually happening across the city. But to give a sense of the scale, we identified something like £33 million worth of investment per year on green spaces, which is fantastic. You know, but that's hidden because it's here, there, and everywhere, and it'll never be perfect. But the more we can learn about the things that are happening across the city by everybody and the resources that are going in, that makes the city of nature real. It's never going to be delivered by the council itself. It can only be delivered by the alliance, by partners, individuals, everybody that's involved, and we are getting there, I think. But we just need to make sure that this lives, this continues on.
Okay, I mean, as I always say in all the meetings, if you think of something afterwards, please do contact us. And obviously Simon is now, as he said, back in parks, as is Mark. Never really left it, heart and mind, never leaves. But he's there now in that different position. So yeah, if you think of anything else, please let us know. As I say, my big ambition, I'm hoping this year, you know how things go, is actually that we can all get face to face and hear from the different groups and celebrate the achievements in person. And as I say, you know, Birmingham Spaces Forum's got their 20th year celebrations going on. So look out for all of those. And hopefully by the time we get to the conference, we'll know the next thing that will be happening and how we can get together. So that's, I think that's probably where we are, almost at the end of the session. That was very good timing.
Perfect timing.
Yeah. So if there aren't any other questions right now, I won't say I'll give you some time back because we've got 1,000 million things to do, and we're just going to go off, maybe grab a cup of tea, but get on with doing all of those things that we do to make Birmingham a better place for everybody. So thank you for joining us, and hope to see you all soon. And I shall read the chat that you are typing away at as well. Make sure we've got that.
Thank you. That was really interesting.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.